Of all the languages of Middle-earth, there are those that are widely known and studied, such as Quenya and Sindarin, but among the rest, two stand out: Khuzdul, the language of the dwarves, and the Black Speech, the language of Mordor. The grammar and lexicon of these two intriguing languages can never be fully known, yet we can observe a few peculiarities to leave us speculating. Could it be that the number of similarities between these two languages is not just a mere coincidence, but indicates a hidden deep relation, one that goes back even before the beginning of the world? Before we delve into these heretical thoughts, let's take a look at these two languages in detail. Khuzdul is the secret and revered language of the dwarves, devised for them and taught to them by Aule, their creator. As such, the dwarves hold their language in high regard, its original form changing ever so slowly, like the weathering of hard rock compared with the melting of snow. Due to its complexity, it was hardly ever spoken by strangers, and many dwarves in the Third Age used it even only as a second language. Despite this, it has had an influence on the language of the men, affecting Adunaic and its descendant Westron, the common speech. Based on external observation, we can find many traits in Khuzdul shared with Semitic languages, consistent with Tolkien's intention to make it resemble Hebrew. The most prominent such feature are consonantal roots. Word roots are given only by a group of usually 3 consonants, while the vowels determine the precise form of the word. Thus, the single root khuzd forms at the same time the singular khuzd, the plural khazad, or adjective khazad. Unfortunately, we know only few sentences in Khuzdul to offer a more comprehensive overview of the grammar, the most known phrase being the popular battle cry, Baruk Khazad, Khazad Aimenu, meaning axes of the dwarves are upon you. Another example is the inscription on Balin's tomb, Balin Fundinul, Uzbad Khazadumu, meaning Balin, son of Fundin, lord of Moria. Thankfully, we have at least plenty of known words from the names of many places of dwarvish origin, such as Gabel Gathol, Great Fortress, Kibil Nala, Silverlode, Baraz Inbar, Redhorn, or Keled Zaram, Mirrormere, where Durin saw the stars appear, providing us with the opportunity to seek etymological connections. In a sense, the Black Speech is the complete antithesis of Khuzdul. Crafted by Sauron for his servants to standardize the communication in Mordor, it was universally hated by all, even orcs. Influenced by the dialects of the orcish tribes under Sauron's command, it is full of harsh, guttural sounds, and speaking it emanates pure evil. Let's hear the most famous example of the language, the ring verse. If you are an elf, please skip forward 11 seconds.
Ashnazg Durbatulug, Ashnazg Gimbatul, Ashnazg Thrakatulug, Ach Burzum Ishikrimpatul.
Black Speech is an agglutinative language similarly to Hungarian or Turkish, as we can see in the words Durbatuluk and Thrakatuluk. The roots durba and thrak, rule and drag, receive the infinitive verb suffix at, then the suffix ul indicating the object, them, in its total form as uluk, them all. Likewise, Burzum Ishi is formed from the root burz, dark, turned into a noun by darkness, and finally made the destination of the binding via ishi, into. As far as the lexicon of Black Speech goes, we do not have that many examples of individual roots as in Khuzdul, but all of them are one syllable only, heavily favoring consonant clusters. Trying to directly compare Khuzdul and Black Speech results in only few similarities. Burz, dark, and Baraz, red, or Thrak, drag, and Thark, staff, or the dwarvish name for Gandalf, Tharkun, literally staff man, and the orcish name for Saruman, Sharku, meaning old man. However, all of these could be just coincidences. Likewise, the obvious similarity between both languages' word for orc, Uruk, and Ruks is easily explained as a loan word from Elvish. Unfortunately, looking for synonyms across both languages does not yield any interesting results either. The words for dark are Burz and Uzn, for rule or ruler are Durb and Uzbad, and that's about all of it. So is that it? Are the similarities between these two constructed languages just coincidences, one that could be found between any two languages in existence, not leading to any conclusive connection? Not yet. There is one other language we need to take into account, Valarin. The language of the Valar, the angelic beings residing in Valinor, was arguably the first language ever spoken in Arda. Even though the Valar did not need to use a language to communicate among themselves, it came to them naturally with their physical bodies, and was derived from the music of the Ainur itself. Valarin is a complicated language, full of long words and sounds strange to the ears of the beings of Middle-earth, especially the elves, who were displeased by hearing it. For that reason, even the Valar preferred to use Quenya when talking to the elves whom they loved and did not want to cause discomfort. Yet despite this, many words from Valarin entered the Elvish language, although heavily adapted to fit Elvish phonetic preferences. Even the names of the great Valar, Manawenus, Aules, Aromes, Ulubos, and Tulukkhistas for Manwe, Aule, Orome, Ulmo, and Tulkas, as the elves called them. The Eldar took few words from the Valar, for they were rich in words and ready in invention at need. But though the honor which they gave to the Valar might have caused them to take words from their speech, whether needed or not, few words of Valarin could be fitted to Elvish speech without great change or diminution. For the tongues and voices of the Valar are great and stern, and yet also swift and subtle in movement, making sounds that we find hard to counterfeit, and their words are mostly long and rapid, like the glitter of swords, like the rush of leaves in a great wind or the fall of stones in the mountains. Other examples of Valarin names include Aþāra-igas for Arda or Nulukkhizdîn and Ibrinidil-Patanezel for Laurelin and Telperion, the great trees of Valinor. Most names can also be analyzed as formed from components such as Tulukkhistas, coming from Tuluk, yellow, and Shata, hair, meaning the golden-haired, or Panai-Keluth, the moon, literally bright mirror. While there is some resemblance between Valarin and languages like Akkadian, the majority of its grammar is not documented. The only known sentence in Valarin is Akashan, he says, referring to Eru Ilúvatar, forming the Quenya word Aksan, law. We can also see an example of word formation in the word Māchan, authority, derived into Māchanas, one of authority, and its plural Māchanumas, authorities, via the infix, and perhaps even Machalam, throne, as a seat of authority. Other than that, we can identify the z suffix in Ayanus, Ainu, formed from the stem Ayanu, hence the plural Ainur could be reconstructed as Ayanumus. It is possible this suffix indicates the nominative form, similar to Proto-Germanic, and it may also reflect the gender of the word. Could this primeval language be the missing link between Khuzdul and Black speech? Actually, as far as Tolkien's early publication on the evolution of the languages of Middle-earth, the Lammas, is concerned, yes! In it, actually, all languages descend from Valarin, in one of three branches named after their originator, Oromaean, Aulayan, and Melkian, forming the languages of the Elves, Dwarves, and Orcs. In this hierarchy, Black speech could have easily been just further descended from Melkian. However, this idea was dropped soon afterwards, the original design of Valarin instead being repurposed into Proto-Elvish, and for a long while there was no notion of the Valar even having a language of their own. Nevertheless, Tolkien ultimately changed his mind again and remade Valarin not as the ultimate proto-language, but merely as an influence on Quenya and the source of its many distinctive words. In this form, Valarin was fully alien to the elves when encountered, and was only ever learned by their most avid lore masters. While we may safely say that the elves developed their language on their own in this version of the Legendarium, we do not have any stated relation between Valarin and languages of the other peoples of Middle-earth. This leaves us with speculation and educated guesses as to what the relation might have been, based on the limited amount of evidence we have. When Aule created the seven fathers of the dwarves, long before the coming of the elves and men, he taught them the language he crafted specifically for his children. This makes Khuzdul a constructed language, created for the sake and beauty of creation itself, not unlike Tolkien's own passion. While Aule's intricate design might have been rooted in Valarin's fundamental principles, much of it was adapted to the dwarven perception of the world, deeply attuned to stone and metal, to be spoken in the resonant depths of mountains and the echoing halls of their underground cities, not in the Valar's heavenly seat. Grammatically, Valarin and Khuzdul do not share many recognizable similarities. Much of the suffixes of Valarin are replaced by the intricate system of consonantal roots and vowel patterns, especially seen in its plurals: Khuzd, Khazad, dwarf, dwarves, bark, baruk, axe, axes, but even in verbs: feleg, tuhu, felak, hewer. If these forms were truly preserved by the dwarves' reverence for their sacred language, they must have been solely Aule's invention and a deliberate aspect of Khuzdul, possibly with the intention to make them short and recognizable even when echoing. The only provable occurrence of this effect in Valarin is the lengthening between Athār, fixed time, festival, and Aþāra, appointed. Even the other example of a fully conjugated verb that we know of, dush amanudhan, marred, supposedly a passive participle, seems to be formed using affixes only. With this chance at identifying parts of Valarin grammar in Khuzdul gone, our only hope is finding lexical similarities between the languages, that is, words or roots shared between both. Is there at least one such word that would make this whole effort not be in vain? Actually, yes, and not just one. First apparent similarity is even in the dwarves' name for Aule, Mahal, meaning maker, resembling the already mentioned Machalam or Machanaz. Even though those words' respective meanings are throne and one of authority, it is not an impossible semantic shift, as Aule was certainly one who had authority over their creation. Maybe it's a good start, but can we find something better?
Panai Kelut
is the Valarin word for the moon, Isil, literally meaning bright mirror. But wait a minute, doesn't Keluth remind us of anything? What was the name for Mirrormere, the dwarves' sacred lake? Keledzaram, mirror lake. Remember, vowels change in Khuzdul with the form of the word, and Keled is used as an adjective here, so it is certainly possible the actual word for mirror as a noun would be Kelud. The change from unaspirated ka to aspirated ka, and the deaspiration and voicing of tha to da give us a glimpse into the phonetic changes in Khuzdul, certainly adding to its unique sound, like a hammer reverberating in a long hall. There is one last Valarin word to explore, and that is Inidil, lily or a similar flower. This word is also present in the Valarin name of Telperion, Ibrinidil patanezel, speculated to mean silver flower leaf green, and was borrowed into Quenya as Indil. We do not know of any similar word in Khuzdul, but, strangely enough, this word is also found in Adunaic, the language of men, as Inzil. How is it possible? We do not know of any Vala or Maya who would visit and teach the men, and a borrowing from Quenya is unlikely, as the word was used in Numenor even during the ban on Quenya. Moreover, early Elven influence on Manish came from Sindarin, not Quenya, and it would be unusual for Za to come from Da anyway. What we do know of, however, is early contact between the men and dwarves in the First Age, and a few loanwords in Adunaic from Khuzdul. Thus we can conclude that this too must have been a borrowing from Khuzdul, likely of the same form, Inzil. This leaves us with the last observable phonetic change in Khuzdul from the to za. While this is not much, it allows us to partially transform word stems between Valarin and Khuzdul. For example, Khuzd could be reconstructed as Kudut, or perhaps Kudutuz with the usual suffix. Lastly, we also have a written account on the similarities between these languages, noted by Pengolod, a scholar of Rumil. But we who have dwelt among men know that, strange though that seems to some, the Valar love them no less. And for my part I perceive a likeness no less, or indeed greater, between the Valarin and the tongues of men, notably the language of the Dunedain, and of the children of Marach, namely Adunaic. Also in general manner it resembles the tongues of the Kasari, though this is not to be wondered at if the tradition that they have is true, that Aule devised for them their tongue in its beginning, and therefore it changes little, whereas the Iglishmek which they made for themselves is changeable. While I hope this evidence is enough to prove a relation between Valarin and Khuzdul, we cannot conclusively tell whether Khuzdul can be categorized as truly descending from Valarin, as its classification as a constructed language complicates things a bit. Were it not for that, however, we could certainly place it somewhere between a language derived from Valarin and an unrelated language, but with a heavy Valarin substrate. One way or another, a link between these two languages is undisputable. Now let's turn our attention to the language of the Orcs. It is not known what became of the concept of the Melkian group of languages, whether it was abandoned by the time Valarin was revised, or if it became a distinct language like Khuzdul, but we know that Morgoth himself was skilled at languages, as evidenced by this account of Manwës. Of the children of Eru, Melkor knew less than his peers, giving less heed to what he might have learned, as we did, in the vision of their coming. Yet, as we now fear, since we know you in your true being, to everything that might aid his designs for mastery, his mind was keen to attend, and his purpose leaped forward swifter than ours, being bound by no axam. From the first he was greatly interested in language, that talent that the Eruhini would have by nature, but we did not at once perceive the malice in this interest, for many of us shared it, and Aule above all. But in time we discovered that he had made a language for those who served him, and he has learned our tongue with ease. He has great skill in this matter. Beyond doubt, he will master all tongues, even the fair speech of the Eldar. Therefore, if ever you should speak with him, beware. While it is likely that Morgoth used Valarin when verbally communicating with the Maiar in his service, including Sauron, there are no up-to-date records of what language he might have created himself for his lesser servants, aside from this likely outdated excerpt. Of other tongues than the Oromian speeches, which have yet some relationship therewith, little will here be said. Orquin, or Orquian, the language of the orcs, the soldiers and creatures of Morgoth, was partly itself of Valian origin, for it was derived from the Vala Morgoth. But the speech which he taught, he perverted wilfully to evil, as he did all things, and the language of the orcs was hideous and foul, and utterly unlike the languages of the Quendi. But Morgoth himself spoke all tongues with power and beauty when so he wished. This Orcian language does not seem to have survived either in Tolkien's later writings, or, had there been any at all, in the speech of the orcs, as, by the time we enter the Second Age, they are said to use languages or dialects formed by corrupting the words from other tongues of Middle-earth that they hear, as hideous as all the other things that they make or use, scarcely sufficient even for their own needs. Thus, when Sauron established his dominion over Middle-earth, we do not know how big a part, if any, the old language created by Morgoth constituted in his new black speech, and any potential Valarin influence we find can be attributed to either of them. Starting with the grammar, we once again don't know enough of either language to compare the individual features found in their constructions. The only shared affix, is used for abstract nouns in black speech, like nes, while it denotes the plural form in Valarin. Looking at the vocabulary is when the comparison becomes interesting. The first word we can take a look at is Aþāra-igas, the sun, literally appointed heat. From this we can reconstruct igas, heat, quite similar to the black speech word chash, fire. If not coincidental, this shows the corruption that black speech words undergo, turning g to ch and s to sh, while contracting the original word into a single syllable. Now for the most interesting word, one very important for Sauron himself. Nazg, ring. We do not find traces of this word in other contemporary languages of Middle-earth, but we find one strikingly similar in Valarin. Mahananashkad, ring of doom, called Mahanaxar in Quenya, is the circle of thrones where the Valar sat in council and passed judgment. Since we know what Mahan means, we must conclude that Nashkad means ring or circle, strikingly similar to Nazg. Could these two words have survived from the days of the first orcs of Morgoth long enough for Sauron to pick them when constructing black speech, or did they appear by his own introduction? We cannot be certain, but we can know one thing. They could not have been an invention of either Dark Masters. For Tolkien, languages were one of the most beautiful forms of art in existence, their creation a process of passion and importance. It would have been impossible for beings of evil to give life to a language like to the orcs themselves. The shadow that bred them can only mock, it cannot make, not real things of its own. I don't think it gave life to the orcs, it only ruined them and twisted them. It would stand to reason then to say that black speech reflects the corruptive nature of both Morgoth and Sauron, who, despite once being a Maya of Aule himself, could not bring anything creative to the language made for his dark ambition, other than perversion of what already existed, twisted and sharpened to exert control and instill fear in his dominion. It would also stand to reason to think that Valarin must have served as the basis of this language, known natively by both Morgoth and Sauron, and was a perfect target of corruption as everything of the Valar, utilizing its powerful origin for the service of evil. This is certainly not a new observation, as one of the projects reconstructing the language of the Valar, Neo-Valarin, is based purely on the assumption that actually everything in black speech is a corrupted form of Valarin. I definitely recommend checking out this project if you are interested to see more of the language. This brings us back to the premise of this video. Does it make sense to consider Khuzdul and black speech related? Do the arguments about the traces of Valarin in these two languages constitute undeniable evidence of their link? Let me know what your thoughts on this matter are in the comments, and thank you for watching.